fifth career, serving in office. What a different job description that is. Harry in our group wonders if when arriving in DC you had that Dorothy of the Wizard of Oz moment, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. Many are very curious about what orientation and the first few weeks of the newly elected Congress is like. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. Well, there's this moment where you build a campaign, a multi-million-dollar campaign, a business, and there's volunteers, and there's hundreds of people, and everybody's involved, and all of a sudden it ends in one day. And then you have to get rid of your office space and all of the stuff, and you just dial everything down. That in and of itself is a really tremendous experience, but in the same time, you have to all of a sudden ramp up, and now you're hiring people for your official staff. So election was a Tuesday, and the following Monday, we went to DC as part of orientation, and we have so many new members. And they bring us, we show up at this hotel, and there's press everywhere. They have them all cordoned off, and I was actually with Neil's daughter. She went up as our staff member for orientation. So we drive up, and there's all this press outside, and we thought, oh, like, what do we do with the car? How do we handle this? Do we valet? I mean, like the minor logistics, but it's very much a turning point. And so from that point in time, we have to hire a new staff. And one of the things that I did not know is that every congressional office is essentially like a small business. There's no coordinated HR function within the House of Representatives. You file all the paperwork. You actually have to request your trash cans for your office, which we found out. One gentleman walked in today and commented that our staff, we must have hired senior staffers because we already have business cards. I mean, which is an absolutely true thing. There are so many things that until you actually say, well, how do you get your business card? Like there's no kind of process for some of these things. But orientation was very interesting. We had a week of orientation right before Thanksgiving, and it was all the new members. It was a lot of classes and events and more events. We had a lot of the ethics training and the harassment training and the how do you start a new office training. That was all done in a bipartisan manner. But a lot of the events were divided. And in fact, even one morning we went out and there was a Republican bus and a Democratic bus. And it wasn't intentional bipartisanship on my part. I just got on the wrong bus. But I did make some Republican friends pretty early on because of that. Which also, the Democratic bus is really crowded, so. So that was a nice way to level it out with people. But the training's really, it was interesting, and they just sort of drop you into it. And then from there, and it's interesting because you don't really, you're meeting all of the other new members, you're trying to get a gauge for what sort of legislative priorities people have. Then we did 3 days of training at Harvard. Their School of Public Policy hosts an event, a bipartisan event, which was actually the best bipartisan event that we had, where it was just day-long briefings on a variety of different topics. They brought in speakers from across the country, and that was really valuable. I'm glad that I went to that. Partially because the information itself was of value, but also because you do spend a lot of time with other new members and start to form those relationships. Then we had another week of orientation back in DC, and then we showed up in January. And in the process, in that interim time, I mean, I was doing interviews for staff members. We hired a chief of staff. We hired a legislative director. We hired an operations officer, an executive officer. We hired our district director. And so it is an interesting time because you're ramping down a campaign and closing everything out, and you're ramping up a congressional office. And we got our keys to the office January 2nd. You get your keys to the office, so you move in, and swearing in day was January 3rd. So it really flips very, very quickly. I think that we've done a great job of hiring up a staff. I feel like we're in a good place. I've already co-sponsored 10 pieces of legislation, and we've been kind of rocking and rolling on that side of things. But certainly it is a lot that occurs in that very short window of time. And there's a number of things where if you don't you don't know what you don't know until you walk into your office and you don't have trash cans. And then they say, well, you haven't requested them yet, for example. But it's been very interesting. And of course, the shutdown, entering Congress from in a place where the government is partially shut down, it changes the dynamic entirely. It's all we talk about. You know, many of us want to be talking about healthcare and prescription drug prices and infrastructure and broadband internet, and we were talking about all of those things up until the middle of December, and now it is how do we end the shutdown, and that's been a real challenge too for new members as we're trying to determine kind of what's our lane, how can we impact change. You know, I'm certainly not. I'm not the one who has negotiating power, so where can I use my voice in a powerful way? How can I advocate for the people of Virginia? And certainly we are one of the states that is most impacted by the shutdown. And, you know, everywhere I go, I hear horrible, tragic, scary stories, not just about the individual experience, but from the air traffic controllers who are talking about their real legitimate fears of having people working 6 days a week, 10-hour days and not getting paid. Bureau of Prisons saying, you know, we have people in dangerous situations in federal prisons not getting paid. They're getting taunted by prisoners. You know, this cannot continue. And so I think that's really changed the dynamic of what it is to enter Congress in the 116th. And you may have additional questions about that. So.